The entire ballroom fell silent when 17-year-old Daniel Harrison stood up and tried to speak, but not because of respect, not because they wanted to hear what the son of billionaire Thomas Harrison had to say. They fell silent because watching him struggle to form words made them uncomfortable. And in that moment, a girl in a borrowed dress did something no one in that room had ever done before. She answered him, not with pity, not with awkward smiles, but in his own language. Daniel Harrison had everything money could buy: a mansion with 12 bedrooms, cars he was too young to drive, the finest private tutors. But he didn't have a single friend, born profoundly deaf. Daniel lived in a world of silence, while everyone around him lived in sound. His father, Thomas Harrison, was one of the wealthiest men in New York, a real estate mogul whose name appeared on buildings across the city. And yet, Thomas couldn't figure out how to bridge the gap between himself and his only son. The fancy charity gala that night was Thomas's idea. He thought maybe, just maybe, if Daniel attended more social events, he'd find his place among the children of other wealthy families. He thought wrong. Daniel sat at a table in the corner, watching lips move, watching people laugh at jokes he couldn't hear, watching the world happen around him while he remained invisible. His mother had passed away when he was 8, and she had been the only one who truly tried to learn sign language. After she died, Daniel's world became even quieter. Across the room, near the kitchen entrance where the catering staff rushed in and out, stood Emma Carter. She wasn't supposed to be in the ballroom at all. At 16, Emma worked part-time for the catering company to help her single mother pay rent on their tiny apartment. But her supervisor was short-staffed and asked if Emma could help serve drinks. Emma borrowed a black dress from her supervisor's daughter, pulled her brown hair into a neat bun, and tried to blend in with the servers who actually belonged there. She noticed Daniel immediately, not because of who he was, though she recognized him from the news as Thomas Harrison's son. She noticed him because she recognized something in his eyes: loneliness, the same loneliness she saw in her own mirror every morning. Emma knew what it felt like to be invisible, to be in a room full of people and feel completely alone. Her father had left when she was 5, and her mother worked 2 jobs just to keep them afloat. At school, Emma was a scholarship kid, the one with worn shoes and a backpack held together with safety pins. She understood rejection. Then it happened. One of the guests, a woman dripping in diamonds and champagne-induced confidence, decided Daniel should give a speech. "Come on, Daniel," she announced loudly, her voice carrying across the ballroom. "Your father donates so much money to these causes. The least you can do is say a few words of thanks." The room turned to look. Daniel's face went pale. His father stood up, trying to politely decline on his son's behalf, but the woman persisted, and others joined in, clapping and encouraging, not realizing the cruelty of their insistence. Daniel stood slowly. Emma watched his hands tremble. He opened his mouth and tried to speak, producing sound that came out unclear and struggled. The room fell into that terrible, uncomfortable silence. People looked away. Some whispered to each other behind their hands. Daniel's father closed his eyes in pain, not for himself, but for what he knew his son was experiencing. And then Daniel's hands began to move. Desperately, rapidly, he was signing, pouring his heart out in the only language that truly belonged to him. But no one understood. No one was listening. Not with their ears. Not with their eyes. Not with their hearts. Except Emma. She stepped forward, her serving tray forgotten on a nearby table. Her hands rose, and she began to sign back. Fluid, confident, clear. Daniel's eyes went wide. For the first time all evening, for the first time in longer than he could remember, someone was actually talking to him. Not at him, not about him. To him. Emma's fingers danced through the air, and she spoke aloud simultaneously, translating Daniel's words for the room. He's saying thank you. Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for supporting children who need medical care, who need hope, who need someone to see them. The ballroom was silent again, but this time it was different. This time, people were actually paying attention. Emma continued translating as Daniel kept signing, his confidence growing with every word. He's saying that his mother taught him that kindness doesn't need to be heard to be powerful, that generosity doesn't need words. and that every child deserves to be understood, no matter how they communicate. When Daniel finished, the applause was thunderous. But Daniel wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at Emma. His hands moved again, asking her a question. Emma smiled, signed back, then spoke aloud. "He wants to know my name." Her voice was soft now, almost shy. "I'm Emma." Daniel signed again. "He says I just gave him the greatest gift anyone has given him in years." A conversation. Thomas Harrison walked over, his eyes wet with tears he didn't bother to hide. He looked at this girl in a borrowed dress, this girl who had somehow reached his son in a way he never could. "How do you know sign language?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Emma's answer was simple and heartbreaking. "My little brother, Charlie, he's deaf. Born that way, just like Daniel. We can't afford fancy schools or special programs. My mom and I learned sign language from library books and free online videos because we wanted Charlie to know that he matters, that his voice matters, even if it's silent." She paused, then added quietly, "I work here part-time. Tonight was my first night serving. I wasn't supposed to be in this room at all." Thomas Harrison did something then that shocked everyone, including himself. He knelt down, bringing himself to eye level with this teenage girl who had just taught him the most important lesson of his life. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for seeing my son. But the story doesn't end there. It couldn't, because what happened next changed everything. Daniel and Emma began meeting every week. Thomas Harrison arranged it personally, insisting that Emma be compensated as Daniel's companion and tutor, not as staff, but as his son's friend. Emma initially refused the money, but her mother convinced her to accept, pointing out that it would allow Emma to quit her other part-time jobs and focus on school. More importantly, it would let her spend time with someone who needed a friend as much as she did. They met at libraries, at parks, at coffee shops. Daniel showed Emma a world she'd never experienced, not the world of wealth, but the world of silence. He taught her what it was like to feel music through vibrations, to read emotion in people's faces with an intensity that hearing people never developed, to find beauty in a sunrise without the distraction of sound. And Emma showed Daniel what he'd been missing: friendship without pretense, conversation without pity, connection without barriers. She introduced Daniel to her brother Charlie. That meeting in the Carter family's small apartment changed Daniel's life. Charlie was 7 years old, full of energy and mischief, and completely unimpressed by Daniel's wealth. To Charlie, Daniel was just another deaf person who understood him. They communicated effortlessly, laughing at inside jokes that no one else in the room could understand unless they watched their hands. Daniel realized something profound that day. He had spent his entire life feeling isolated in a world of hearing people, never considering that there might be an entire community of people just like him. Emma helped Daniel find that community. She took him to deaf events, to sign language social gatherings, to support groups for deaf teenagers. For the first time in his life, Daniel was surrounded by people who communicated the way he did, who understood his experiences, who didn't see his deafness as something to overcome, but as simply part of who he was. Daniel bloomed. The quiet, isolated boy began to smile more, to stand taller, to believe that he belonged somewhere. But Thomas Harrison was learning too. He started taking sign language classes, real ones, intensive ones. He hired a deaf consultant to help make his company more accessible. He established a foundation to provide free sign language education and resources to families who couldn't afford them, naming it after his late wife. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, Thomas began to build a real relationship with his son. Their first full conversation in sign language happened 6 months after the gala. It was halting and imperfect, with Thomas frequently pausing to remember signs. But it was theirs. Daniel cried. So did his father. A year passed. Daniel was 18 now, preparing for college. Emma was 17, still working hard, still helping her family, but now with opportunities she'd never dreamed possible. Thomas had set up a college fund for both Emma and Charlie, not as charity, but as thanks. Emma had given him his son back. It was the least he could do. The second annual charity gala arrived. This time, things were different. The event had a team of sign language interpreters. The entertainment included deaf performers. And when it came time for speeches, Daniel stood up confidently. Next to him stood Emma, but she wasn't translating this time. She was standing beside him as his date, as his best friend, as the girl who had changed his life by simply seeing him. Thomas Harrison gave the speech instead, and what he said brought the entire room to tears. Last year, my son stood in this room and tried to tell you something important. I didn't understand him. Most of you didn't even try. But one person did. A girl who was here working, trying to help her family make ends meet, stopped everything to give my son the one thing money can't buy: understanding, connection, dignity. He paused, looking at Emma and Daniel. Emma didn't see a billionaire son. She didn't see a disability. She saw a person trying to communicate, and she listened, really listened. She taught me that being a father isn't about providing things. It's about being present. It's about learning your child's language, whatever that language might be. Emma gave me the courage to finally become the father my son deserved. The applause was immediate, but Thomas held up his hand. He wasn't finished. Tonight, I'm announcing a new initiative, the Emma Carter Scholarship Program. Full funding for any student learning sign language to support a deaf family member or friend. Free sign language classes in every school in the district, and a new community center dedicated to bringing deaf and hearing families together. He turned to Emma, signing as he spoke. Thank you for showing me what really matters. Emma was crying now, but she was smiling too. Daniel took her hand and signed something. Thomas, reading his son's hands, translated aloud with permission. He says Emma taught him that silence isn't empty. It's full of everything that matters. Love, friendship, understanding. All the things that don't need sound to be heard. But there was one more surprise that night. Daniel approached the microphone, and this time he spoke. Not in sign language. In actual spoken words, clear and determined, though still carrying the unique tone of someone who learned to speak without hearing. I practiced, he said slowly, carefully, for Emma. Every person in that room was completely silent, hanging on every word. She saw me, really saw me. Thank you, Emma, for everything. Emma threw her arms around him, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. Daniel had spent months working with a speech therapist. Not because anyone asked him to, not because he needed to prove anything, but because he wanted to. He wanted to show Emma that she had inspired him to step outside his comfort zone the way she had stepped outside hers that night a year ago. 5 years later, Daniel graduated from Gallaudet University, the world's premier university for deaf students. Emma graduated with honors in sign language interpretation. They remained best friends, their bond unbreakable. Thomas Harrison had transformed from a distant father into an activist for deaf rights and accessibility. Charlie, Emma's little brother, grew up confident and proud, knowing that his deafness didn't define his worth. The Harrison Foundation that Thomas established now operates in 12 states, providing free resources, education, and support to deaf individuals and their families. Emma runs the youth outreach program. Daniel serves on the board, using his experience to guide policy and ensure that deaf voices are always centered in the conversation. But if you ask any of them what changed their lives, they all say the same thing. It wasn't money. It wasn't programs or initiatives or foundations. It was one moment, one choice, one person deciding to step forward when everyone else stepped back. One girl who saw a boy trying to be heard and decided to listen. That night at the gala, Emma didn't just translate Daniel's words. She translated his humanity. She reminded everyone in that room that communication isn't about sound. It's about connection. It's about seeing someone really seeing them and saying, I hear you. I understand. You matter. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone isn't something money can buy. It's not found in stores or wrapped in boxes. It's found in the simplest, most profound act of all, paying attention, truly seeing the person in front of you, listening not just with your ears, but with your heart. Daniel Harrison was born into wealth, but he was poor in things that truly mattered until one person taught him he was worth being understood. Emma Carter was born into poverty, but she was rich in the only currency that really counts: compassion. kindness, the willingness to reach across the divide that separates us and build a bridge. Their story reminds us that we all have the power to change someone's life. We all have the ability to be the person who finally sees, who finally hears, who finally understands. And sometimes all it takes is learning to speak someone else's language, to enter their world, to tell them through our actions that they are not invisible, they are not alone, and they are deeply, profoundly valued. Because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to be heard. We're all just hoping someone will take the time to truly listen. And when someone does, when someone finally sees us for who we really are, it changes everything. Not just for us, for everyone around us. That's the real miracle. Not that a poor girl learned sign language for her brother. Not that a billionaire's son learned to believe in himself. The real miracle is what happens when two people from completely different worlds discover they speak the same language after all. The language of human connection. The language of compassion. The language that needs no sound to be heard by those who truly listen.